Hello, welcome to our Exploring Sustainable Substrates webinar. This is brought to you by Pitmoss and Next Cycle Michigan. My name is Maggie Cullinan. I am the current manager of research and development at Pitmoss. I want to say first and foremost, I am not a grower. I just have the good fortune of working with an extremely knowledgeable and wise grower at Pitmoss, Dr. Bethke. But I am a sustainability professional, I am a soil scientist, and I am passionate about all forms of sustainability and stewardship. And just a little bit about Pitmoss and Next Cycle. So Pitmoss is a manufacturer of high quality potting media and animal bedding. We do that entirely in the USA, made out of recycled materials. And Next Cycle Michigan supports development of sustainable businesses in Michigan. And we are coming together to help the horticulture and agriculture industries become more aware of sustainability issues facing them, and what we can do as an industry to look towards the future and improve. So what we'll cover today, we'll go over a brief history of substrates and where the industry is headed, the meaning of sustainability, thinking about the environment and beyond, understanding resilience, how exploring sustainable substrates can benefit your business now and in the long term. And then the real meat of this webinar will actually be hearing from our panelists who are on the call right now. They are real growers with real experience, and they will tell you all about what they know on this topic. So to get started, just a brief history of substrates. The substrate industry has changed over time as the demands of horticulture and agriculture have changed. So Dr. Bethke actually came up with this 3-paradigm framework to describe the changes that the industry has seen. So the first paradigm is native soil sterilization. The second paradigm involves peat and other non-renewable resources. And the third paradigm is upcycled and local materials. So native soil sterilization began long before what we're doing right now. In the beginning, containerized media was just soil that people dug out of the ground and put it in pots. On the left is actually a recreation or an artist's idea of what the Hanging Gardens of Babylon might have looked like. This is just to show, this is one of our first recorded instances of potted plant growth outside of the ground. So in the past, people gathered soil from outside and put it into pots to cultivate their plants indoors or just anywhere not in the ground. The problem with this is that native soil does not like to be disturbed. It is heavy because of its mostly mineral composition. The aeration can be a problem because when you disturb that native mineral soil, it loses its structure. So water and gas exchange can be an issue in a container. It required sterilization, which was an extremely energy-intensive process. Energy meaning people, labor had to lift this soil and sterilize it and do a lot of work to get it usable in containers, so no diseases were brought from outside to inside, and it was inconsistent. You had to know where to get the soil that had the desirable texture or properties. Otherwise, you would have an inconsistent product in your pots. And this continued well into the 20th century until horticulturists went in search of lighter, more consistent soil alternatives. So in the UK in the 1930s, the John Innes composts were developed. And the basic mix for this was loam, peat, sand, and fertilizer. And you'll notice that loam and sand are still both mineral components of soil. It was still a heavy mix, but it was lighter, and it was still inconsistent, but it was better. And then in the 1960s, Cornell developed the Cornell peat light mix. This included peat, vermiculite, perlite, bark, fertilizers, and wetting agents. And you will notice at this point, there is no more mineral soil in this mix. Vermiculite and perlite are both they're rocks that we mine and then manipulate to have certain properties. And this mix was kind of revolutionary in that it was light while still meeting bulk density requirements. It was sterile, so it completely avoided that time-consuming, labor-intensive process of soil sterilization, and it drained well while still being able to retain water thanks to the peat. And this was really the advent of soilless growing media as we know it today. These soilless mixes required the use of imported or extracted materials. So peat, you might not know this, comes from drained and mined bogs in the subarctic. This plant matter grown in bogs basically decays, sinks below the surface of a very wet, cold bog, or it dies and then sinks below the surface of a very wet, cold bog and then does not decay. And so we're basically left with this plant skeleton that has this remarkable natural ability to retain water on its surface. Vermiculite and perlite are both mined from quarries. They are expanded rock, so we mine them, heat them to extreme temperatures, and they puff up and give us these really special porous properties. And sand, which is still used in a lot of containers, is dug up from rivers, it's removed from coastlines and mines, and we are actually facing a sand shortage at the moment. It's becoming an issue. So the problem with these resources is that they can't really last forever. And this ties into the idea, this perspective that we could use these materials ties into the idea of living better through chemistry. So this was also at the time when we were applying more pesticides, using more fertilizers, and we didn't really fully understand the consequences that that would have on our natural environment, and in turn, what that would do to our own systems in the long term. So we're still largely in this second paradigm. A lot of growers are still peat-based. We use a lot of those extracted materials still. And I don't want to discount the progress of this paradigm because it was critical to the development of the horticulture industry as it exists today. But now we're learning more about the consequences of this style of substrate. And you can see on the right, I've got two separate supply chains. I've got cardboard to trash and peat to plants. But in the future, we're looking to taking those waste materials, engineering them, and turning them into usable, sustainable substrates. So that is what the third paradigm is about. It's about using upcycled and local materials to create viable potting soils. So I work for Pitmoss. We use recycled paper and cardboard to make substrates, but there are other resources available today, like wood fiber, which comes from, trees, biochar, which can come from waste products, composts. All of these things can be used to replace some of those traditional materials. And there are tons and tons of other ones. I mean, rice hulls, hemp, all of these things, there's a varied amount of them, and we're still learning how to use those materials. But sustainability has to come to the horticultural industry. But why is that? Well, if you want an industry to be sustainable, it means you want it to be able to continue. A lot of people hear sustainability and think environmentally friendly, but that's not necessarily the case. Sustainability is often visualized as a three-legged stool. So we have the environmental leg, the social leg, and the economic leg. Social sustainability means that something is fair and just. It supports people and culture. Environmental sustainability means it benefits or does not degrade our natural environment. And economic sustainability means that that system generates or does not hinder the generation of financial wealth. So when you picture this stool, you have to imagine that your system is sitting on top of it. And the reason that this idea is so important is because if one leg of that stool collapses, the entire system collapses. It doesn't have to happen fast. It doesn't have to happen suddenly. It's not like catastrophic failure. It just means that if all of these things are not aligned, then that system cannot continue to persist in the way that it is currently existing indefinitely. Something has to give. And it's also important to remember that one broken leg can result in damage to the others. So some illustrative examples: what happens when business-focused cost-cutting measures, so an attempt to make a business more economically sustainable, result in decreased employee safety? Well, now you have a social sustainability problem. People aren't going to want to stay and work there. It's too dangerous. So that business cannot persist. What happens when environmental problems affect the supply chain? That's kind of what's happening right now in our industry with peat. So environmental issues, regulations, that sort of thing are impacting the economics of peat. And you saw this graphic in some of our communications about this webinar. This is from the USGS Mineral Commodity Summaries from 2003 to 2023. This is just the reporting of what exactly was happening with the peat price over those years. And you can see in recent years, it's really started to fluctuate. This is because of unpredictable storms, issues with the harvesting of the peat, all kinds of problems. But on our side of things in the horticultural industry, this is leading to unpredictability in price and supply, and that is not good for business. That makes it really hard for growers to predict what next year will be like, what their margins need to be like in order for them to sustain themselves. So sustainability is not just about protecting the environment, it's about protecting your business in the long term. And that means taking all three of those considerations, the environment, the economy, and also the social conditions of a thing into consideration. And this ties into the idea of resilience. So a lot of times in sustainability circles, sustainability and resilience will be kind of paired together. Resilience is the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties. So in this example, I know these are not apples to apples comparisons, but these are just illustrative examples. The banana is a clone. All bananas are clones, which means they're all susceptible to the same disease. So if you're a banana farmer and your plantation gets a disease, well, now you're out all of your money, you're out your whole crop. It's a major problem. How do you recover from that? In contrast, a diversified farm grows lots and lots of different crops. So if one of them fails, they still have plenty of opportunities to make the money that they need to make to sustain themselves. So that farm is resilient to change. So diversification can be a good way to embed resilience within your business. To that end, exploring sustainable substrate options can give you a plan B if unforeseen challenges with your current substrate arise. And that brings me to this idea that there doesn't have to be anything wrong with your current substrate for you to want to explore new options or different combinations of ingredients, because it's better to prepare for those challenging situations before they occur. If there's a shortage with one of your materials, peat, core, whatever, if you have a backup plan that you know you can manage, you know you can implement and be successful with, then your business is more resilient to changes beyond your control. So understanding multiple substrate options and management requirements can make you prepared for weaknesses or changes in substrate supply chains. Now, the big question here is also what makes a substrate sustainable? A few general rules of thumb when it comes to sustainability: the farther it has to travel to reach you, the less environmentally sustainable it likely is. So coconut coir is something that is often touted as a peat moss alternative, but there's kind of more environmental consequences with that too, because it has to travel from India and Sri Lanka to get to the United States. So that's a lot of carbon emissions. That's not so environmentally sustainable. The more processing it requires, the less sustainable it's likely to be. So if something has to be engineered or manufactured in a really energy intensive process with lots and lots of processing, that can be less sustainable. Virgin materials will frequently be less sustainable than byproducts or recycled alternatives. So in the case, let's say we'll use pit moss as an example. Cardboard is already being produced as part of a different process. We can take that waste and use it to make a really high quality substrate. Virgin materials, on the other hand, if we had to go out and extract a material to make our substrates, that would be less sustainable because we're no longer using a waste product. A few other notes: there's more to consider than just the sustainability of the substrate itself. So some substrates can contribute to the sustainability of your overall operation, meaning the environmental and economic sustainability of your operation by using less water and less fertilizer. So these are also considerations that you want to think about as you explore different options. Poor labor practices are a threat to the sustainability of a product. So if something is being made using unfair labor practices, it's going to eventually impact the availability of that product or can be a problem going forward. And also, laws and regulations can influence product availability and therefore the sustainability of that supply chain. So if certain substrates are coming under fire, by regulators, then you just want to have your thumb on that because it might impact your availability to source that material. So here are some reasons that you might want to explore sustainable substrate options. These are reasons that we have heard from our customers or from people that use other products. First, I want to use a substrate that's produced entirely in the USA. A lot of substrate materials are imported. Maybe this is really important to you, maybe it's not. I want to grow peat-free for environmental reasons. Maybe those bogs are just really close to your heart and you want to stop requiring that they be drained and harvested. I think growing peat-free would help me stand out to customers. Market pressures can be a really good reason to explore other options. People are becoming more aware of what sustainability means in all parts of their lives. So this could be sort of a feather in your cap as a grower when your customers see your products on the shelves. I want to reduce the amount of fertilizer and water that I use. Again, this is a consequence of exploring other substrate options. You want to be more efficient overall. That can impact your bottom line and the environment. Or maybe I want to explore alternatives to make my operation more resilient to supply chain challenges. You're seeing the numbers, you're seeing the supply chain and price fluctuations, and you just want to make sure that you have something in your back pocket that you can use going forward should something happen.